All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. So, today we are here to talk about the absolute state of it. The absolute state of it is referring to, of course, the current status of primary and secondary weapons and what I think of the Galvanized mods. And also, not to the full review of, but my thoughts on how the arcanes that are on primaries and secondaries now have been handled overall. The general gist is that I'm really happy with it. I think that it is a huge improvement, and it makes primary and secondary weapons much closer to melee. We are also, in this video, going to be talking about the Glaive Prime to show where it's kind of at, as it was, nerfed for this patch, but I just want to show kind of where it is sitting at currently as well. So, first and foremost, this is more so what builds are going to be looking like going forward, I think. The Phantasma is a little bit of an outlier because Galvanized Acceleration is way more of a thing on this weapon, but this weapon I have entirely cut Prime point blank from the build. This is, so near as I can tell, not a useful mod whenever you have access to like the full roster of Galvanized mods at the point we are currently at. That is due to, of course, the Phantasma being a status weapon, and because the status can murder on its own, but also because Galvanized Savvy, this weapon can kill fodder enemies even if it doesn't have the initial bump up in damage. So it'll activate Galvanized Savvy, and then Galvanized Savvy and its equivalents are much better than any of the base damage mods, including primed point blank. Because the moment you have this, like giving you 80% per status, and with the amount of status that this weapon can kick out, we're talking about 2 statuses on an enemy already being at 160% damage, and getting the third one to go way beyond prime point blank is super easy. Take that in combination with the new arcanes, where we're getting also percent damage, which is an additive modifier with the Galvanized Savvy stuff, and we're getting all the base damage that we're honestly ever going to need, and prime point blank just becomes not a thing that you're going to want to use. This also goes for weapons that have a good amount of status in just, regular assault rifles and stuff, and also secondary weapons. They are not going to care about Hornet Strike or Serration, as far as I've been able to tell, and from what I've tested so far. They are much more going to prefer in those slots, if they can fit it, stuff like Seeking Fury, where we get punched through, or legitimately just straight up more status. The one kind of like outlier to that are mods like Blaze, where this gives, base damage and also heat, which is the element that I'm looking for. In order to weight myself more towards heat so that I get more of that kind of a proc. That's part of this too. And also, what we're going to be showing off is not going to be the absolute full power of any of these weapons, because I have very sadly not been able to fully farm out the max level of the arcanes, and there are some additional bonuses at rank 5, where like the extra reload speed and the extra ammo maximum on like Merciless, for example, and then Deadhead with the headshot multiplier and the less weapon recoil. That stuff all matters, and I am going to get this stuff farmed up to max as soon as possible. But for right now, I'm just going to be showing off the rank 3 stuff, so take that into account, that this is not even the height of where these weapons are going to end up. With that, that's how the Phantasma is looking right now. The new core, obviously, nerfed weapon for this patch. Very similar stuff here. We're using Galvanized Diffusion. All of the Galvanized multi-shot mods are strict upgrades. There is no reason, there's no debate between using the Galvanized multi-shot mods and the regular ones. You are always going to use the Galvanized versions. They are purely better. You can throw Split Chamber into the garbage. Like, that's completely unnecessary. If you have these new Galvanized mods, just give it to a new player. Your friendly neighborhood new player. Just bequeath that upon them and never think about it again. That is my general advice to you. And then other than that, Galvanized Shot, once again, because this has really good status, Galvanized Shot is hilarious on this weapon. Even weapons that only have like 3 statuses that they're naturally going to be applying, it's way more than good enough. You absolutely do not need to worry about like needing to meet like some like 5 status requirement. Obviously, if you're going to play a Warframe like Saren or something, who's going to spread a bunch of like, corrosive, and like all these other elements like Toxin or whatever else, you're going to get an even larger bonus out of Galvanized Shot. But that is super unnecessary, and the Kuvanu Core is stronger than it has ever been. The nerf has not slowed it down at all. Obviously, had it not been nerfed, it would be even crazier. But as it stands right now, with just the rank 3 secondary Merciless that I have acquired so far, this weapon fucking slaps and can keep up or surpass many melee weapons in the steel path, which is great. Like, if this is going to be one of the absolute top tier secondary weapons, it should be able to surpass a good number of the melee weapons in the steel path. Is it going to surpass all of them? Situationally, maybe. And because it is a situationally maybe, I think that's fantastic. It means that we're going to have more competition between melee weapons and non-melee weapons. Of course, that also comes with the potential to literally just use both, because once you max out secondary dexterity, you get the 7.5 seconds of combo duration and the holster speed, which can be incredibly, incredibly useful for freeing up a mod slot on your melee weapon to make it even stronger, and then just have extremely, extremely strong versions of both the new core and whatever melee weapon you happen to be using that is combo based. So great stuff, just generally going into this. Also, a huge note for how these mods work. If we're looking at Galvanized Diffusion, you can see that it gives 110% multi-shot, and then on kill, 30% multi-shot for 20 seconds, which stacks up to 4 times. That means that we are going to get an additional 120% multi-shot here. So this will instead be giving us 230% multi-shot overall. And that's going to be active at max capacity nearly 100% of the time. I would wager that in any mission where you're actively playing, you're going to have like a 95% plus, and that's like actually kind of a pessimistic view on it. It's going to be like a pretty much 99% uptime. If that mission goes beyond, I would say 10 minutes, pretty much going to be active at max capacity all the time. Absolutely incredible. And the reason for that is because even in the unlikely event that you don't kill an enemy with this weapon for 20 seconds, whenever those 20 seconds pass, each stack has 20 seconds. So if you're fully stacked up, you have 4 instances of 20 seconds that need to pass before you kill an enemy in order for all of your stacks to deplete. You can only lose 1 stack every 20 seconds. So if you stack it up to 4, 20 seconds pass, now you're on 3 for an additional 20 seconds. And if you get a kill, it goes right back to 4, goes right back to the 20-second timer. And it refreshes itself even when you're at max stacks. So you're not losing it all the time and then just instantly getting it back. You're just maintaining. If you have 10 seconds left and you kill a guy, it'll go back to 20. So this is really, really easy to persist, and it is the best possible way they could have implemented these buffs and have them be like very consistent and actually need very little ramp up and also a very low amount of upkeep to make them still hyper relevant buffs. Great stuff. The arcanes work exactly the same way. Also, very notable here is for the on-kill merciless arcanes and also the on-kill multi-shot stuff. Status kills do count for these, so they are super simple to maintain. Great stuff. Galvanized Shot, exactly the same thing. Status kills count for this, and it decays in exactly the same manner. So that is absolutely wonderful. Also, notable thing here about Galvanized Shot, this stacks 3 times, so it goes to 120%, meaning that if you have 5 statuses on an enemy, then you're looking at 600% damage should you ever need that for some reason that you're going to be doing additionally to an enemy, which is relevant for Warframes like Mesa, for example, who can use Galvanized Shot and Galvanized Diffusion and receive the buffs from them. So that stuff, absolutely fantastic. The one negative that I have to say is secondary Deadhead. So this doesn't work on AoE headshots and also does not work on status headshots, making this much less compelling. However, if you are going to be able to get these stacks, it only needs 3 stacks, and those stacks persist for considerably longer. Literally, like 24 seconds compared to 4 seconds. It's literally 20 additional seconds for every stack. So you need to kill one guy with a headshot every 30 seconds, and you get an additional headshot multiplier, which does make that more likely. So I think the secondary Deadhead, once I'm testing it at rank 5, could be considerably more compelling, and I'm not there yet. But just like early on impressions of this is that below rank 5 at least, I've not been having a really good time whenever I've been trying this out. Of course, they do, again, all stack to the same percentile, so it's going to be a little bit to flavor, like whether or not you're going to be planning on using a bunch of melee weapons, whether or not you're not planning on getting headshot kills, or whether you need the reload speed, which is going to be the case for a few weapons, I'm sure, or whether or not that headshot multiplier is going to really matter for you. So I am super happy with how these function. Obviously, like many people were worried that on-kill was going to be too restrictive. So far, it has proven to really not be very restrictive at all. Only in like really protracted fights, like how the current Sisters of Parvos and the Kuvalich fights are set up right now with their like adaptive DR, which will make I'll probably do an entire video on that. Only there do you ever really lose stacks, and usually even in those fights, as long as you're bringing an appropriate build for those fights aren't going to last long enough that you're going to burn off all of your stacks. And also, those enemies have additional enemies in the arena, so you're normally going to be stacked up right before the fight. So unless the fight is going to take more than a couple minutes, which is possible, but I would say generally unlikely, you're not going to run into any trouble. So yeah, generally just how this stuff is working, super, super happy with it. First thing we're going to do, I'm going to show the Phantasma because it is a fucking war crime. And this thing's a menace. Like, this was, of course, on my list of weapons to look out for in this new system. And it is a fucking demon, especially with like the punch through added to it. Like, you can just, it's yeah, it is problematic. This weapon, yeah, it's a problem. What I just showed here, that happens on Steel Path. That's it's not really any different. Pretty much just does that for like at least a half an hour. Pretty much just completely eliminates anything in your range of vision. Basically, is just completely eliminated. You can see in the top right, the green buffs that I have up there. I changed the color to green to make them a little bit more pleasant to look at. You can see those stacks falling off on Merciless as the first buff there. You get 4 seconds per stack, and then it ticks down 1 stack. That's what I'm talking about there when I say that these buffs are easy to persist. They're very, very easy to stack up, and it's super, super nice. So that is great, of course. And then, of course, we are looking at the other buff, which I believe that's the symbol for our status buff. That should be what that is. I don't think that's the other one. I'm pretty sure that is not, or not on this. I'm pretty sure that's not the buff here on Galvanized Acceleration. Yeah, that was the timer was too long. So that must be Galvanized Savvy because this is a 20-second timer. But yeah, it's really good. Really, really good the way that this stacks up. The Phantasma, any enemy that's vulnerable to status, and whenever I say vulnerable to status, I don't mean liches, unfortunately, because they have limits on how much can be stacked on them. This is a status applicator weapon that kills usually through a shit zillion heat procs. So liches and stuff are not going to be vulnerable to this nearly as much. So that is an unfortunate thing about this weapon, but basically every single other enemy in the game evaporates whenever they are touched by this weapon, and it is extremely powerful. Moving on to the Kuvanu Core. How is the Kuvanu Core faring in this new environment? The answer is very well. It's better than it's ever been. It has having no issues really whatsoever, and it absolutely melts enemies. With the new mods and stuff, there is sometimes a little bit of a ramp up. So like on these enemies, you ramp up and kill a couple dudes, and then the meltdown begins after that. It's still very much what we're used to, with a little extra damage, let's say. Just a wee bit of extra damage. Yeah, this has been super, super good. No real problems here. I will say, once again, that this gets considerably, I cannot express this enough, this gets considerably more powerful whenever you start adding any additional statuses that your Warframe can provide on top of this, because we are, of course, only looking at 3 different statuses on the Kuvanu Core. And 3 is plenty. But if you hit 4, you start seeing real fucky numbers start coming out of these enemies. It gets real gross, real fast. Now, with all that super powerful stuff that's going on, let's also talk about where the Glaive Prime is. Glaive Prime received a nerf. This build is like, still very, very normal for what you're going to be doing whenever you're throwing the Glaive Prime. It is still only a one form of build, which is really compelling and easy to put together. Some expensive mods are present here, of course. But those mods tuned down to like a rank 8 are still going to perform absolutely wonderfully. So not a big deal there. This generally boils down to you throw it slower, but it hits just as hard as it did. Like the real shit here is that, hey, you throw it a little slower and then the enemies die. It still always procs that slash, and the enemies, they die from that. It's not a big deal. And like you can do quick throws, and it'll do less damage, but honestly, against most enemies, it's going to do way more than enough damage, so haven't had any problems with it. I've taken it like about, you know, an hour, maybe a little more into like Kuva Fortress Steel Path, and it's still just melting enemies there. So I think it's a little bit less fun to use because you can't just like whip it super fast, but whenever you throw it, it's going to kill what you throw it at. And that's really the big takeaway, I would say. I will say that other melee weapons have been nerfed more than the Glaive Prime because the Glaive Prime is obviously not using the mods that got majorly nerfed here. And Berserker is a big loss, but I do think that once you have either a primary or secondary that has a maxed out dexterity mod, things are going to be pretty much the same for most melee weapons, and the only real losers in the melee department are weapons that were kind of barely keeping up, which is not a huge subset of them. There were a lot of really good melee weapons, so for the most part, things are going to really realistically remain the same for most people using melee, unless they absolutely needed to use Berserker to get by. I would highly advise, instead of using Berserker, you should just use Primed Fury if you have it. If you don't have Primed Fury, I would definitely advise Quickening. Quickening is very good as well. And once you have those dexterity mods, you can get rid of your Drifting Contact or whatever you're using for status, or not status, combo duration, and then replace that with whichever one you're not using. So if you're using Quickening, then you can put a Fury in to that slot. Or alternatively, you can opt for a little bit less attack speed than you were getting previously with like fully maxed out Berserker, and you can go with the Gladiator attack speed mod, which I totally forget the name of. It's the Gladiator attack speed mod that also will be giving you some of your nerf back, essentially, because we got Gladiator Vice, which is 30% attack speed, but then also 10% critical chance per combo multiplier. You can include this in your build. And that basically boils down to you get half of the nerf to Blood Rush back whenever you use one Gladiator mod. And if you figure out how to put 2 Gladiator mods in here, you will then get the entire nerf to Blood Rush completely back onto your weapon, and everything will just go about your day as normal, as it were. Unfortunately, the other Gladiator mods that we have here are considerably worse. Gladiator Rush can be used in place of a Drifting Contact if you have the extra mod points for it to get a little bit of that back initially, and just at a trade-off of a little bit less combo duration as compared to Drifting Contact, which is totally valid. Generally speaking, though, I don't think you honestly need this additional crit chance per combo multiplier, and the Gladiator mods and using them on Helios is also a significant nerf that happened in this patch. But that mostly affects Warframes that were utilizing that interaction, such as Baruch and Korra, etc., and not so much just the actual regular use of melee weapons. So yeah, that's just kind of the breakdown of like where things are headed right now. Obviously, more testing needed. I need to farm out a bunch of Arcanes. I'm working on the new Sisters of Parvos weapons. So far, just general first impressions on a couple of those for those of you that are curious. Out of the ones that I have gotten so far, we have the Tenet Archiplasmor. This has performed very well. If you were a huge lover of the Plasmor, you should go farm this. It's very nice. I've got a magnetic one as my first one, but I also think you could go with like a heat one. There's a number of good options, I think, for the Archiplasmor, or the Tenet version anyway, that it's very nice. And then we have the Tenet Envoy, which is the new big rocket launcher, which I've also been having a very good time with so far. Obviously, both of these are not like full form, and well, the Plasmor is a full build on it. Of course, just there's the MR to be gotten out of forming it 2 more times, so I might do that eventually. But this is a full build. And the Envoy, I'm still working on getting it to its max capacity to see what it's really capable of. In terms of secondary stuff, I am working on the Cycron general first impression. So this is that I think it's going to be pretty good. It's going to be comparable to the Kuvanu Core. And then we have the Tenet Diplos, which if you just like machine gun secondaries, these have a neat gimmick. They reload while they're holstered, and there's some like just generally cool mechanical stuff that they're doing. I do think that their special mode works backwards, and I'm sure I'll go into that more whenever I do a full video on them, but they've been nice so far. So of the 4 Tenet weapons that I've gotten as of now, I've been pretty happy with all of them, and that feels really good to say because, you know, we got a couple stinker Kuva weapons, and that's not to say that we don't have a couple stinker Tenet weapons, but I haven't run into them so far. Yeah, really good stuff overall, just like starting out on this patch. Obviously, since my Ureli video, Ureli did get a buff to every single one of her abilities, and as just a small update here, I don't think any of those buffs really make any kind of a difference for Ureli actually being a good Warframe, unfortunately. But everything else in this update, I've pretty much really been enjoying outside of the final showdown with Liches and Sisters of Parvos, which I'm going to make an entire video on that stuff anyway. So we'll go into that later. But yeah, the new systems with the Arcanes and the new Galvanized mods, I really, really like. I do think it's interesting. And we'll talk more about the kind of ramp through the content where, like, it seems like DE is pushing people into Steel Path, and I think there's like an interesting discussion to be had about why that might be. But yeah, good stuff overall. Really enjoying just like the general gameplay loop of like doing the Liches and like getting my Arcanes and like doing a bunch of Steel Path and getting that farm and getting all these unlocks on weapons and things. And it's been a really, really fun time so far, just working through the content. So yeah, general update stuff. Hope you guys have enjoyed this little discussion. And I will see you for more specific videos into these weapons and also more specific into a bunch of different things about this patch because there's a lot to discuss going towards TennoCon.